It started with a bang. Literally, I was halfway through my Sunday morning coffee when I heard the ladder slam against the side of my house. I darted to the window, expecting to see a squirrel or maybe the neighbor's kid tossing a basketball again. Instead, I saw Karen. Full name, Vanessa Langford. President of the Hilldale Lakes HOA, destroyer of peace and all that is holy. She wore her usual sun hat, oversized sunglasses, and an attitude like she was auditioning for a role in a reality show no one asked for. But what really made my blood run cold was the gallon of bright green paint she had balanced on the roof. My roof. I shot out the front door, my slippers barely hanging on. "What the hell are you doing on my roof, Vanessa?" She didn't even flinch. "Fixing a violation. Your roof color doesn't match the HOA's updated aesthetic code. We sent out 3 notices. You can't just paint someone's house without permission," I yelled, fists clenched. She dabbed her brush in the open can and said with the fakest calm I've ever seen, "Actually, per Section 14 of the Architectural Compliance Addendum, if a homeowner fails to correct a violation after 3 notices, the HOA is permitted to take corrective action." "That doesn't mean this," I pointed furiously. "You broke into my backyard, climbed on my roof, and started painting it neon spinach without my consent." She gave me that glazed, passive-aggressive look she always used when she was about to do something insane and pretend it was normal. "You were warned, Everett. That's my name, Everett Brandt. I'm a 39-year-old mechanical engineer, divorced, no kids, and I bought this house specifically to get away from lunatics. Apparently, I failed. I called the cops. By the time they showed up, Vanessa had finished half the front side of my roof. My house looked like a radioactive turtle shell. Officer Delaney, poor guy, looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Ma'am, did you get written consent to go on his property?" Vanessa waved her printed HOA bylaws like a golden ticket. "The rules are clear." He ignored 3 notices. "We even put a color swatch in the last one. Green is the new approved theme." I cut in. "I never got any of these supposed notices." She pulled out copies, all of them dated the same day 2 days ago. 3 notices in 2 days, I said, holding them up for Delaney. "That's not due process." "That's harassment." Delaney raised an eyebrow. "I'm going to have to report this. You can't alter someone's property like this, HOA authority or not." Vanessa's smile finally cracked. "This is a misunderstanding. We're within our rights." But she was already backing off the roof. After she left, I climbed up to inspect the damage. The paint was oil-based and thick. Stripping it would cost a fortune, not to mention the HOA fines I knew she'd try to slap on me next. I didn't sleep that night. I was too busy digging. The next morning, I requested the community bylaws directly from the county clerk's office. What Vanessa handed Officer Delaney, not even the latest version. As it turns out, the real HOA charter hadn't been updated in over 6 years. There was no architectural compliance addendum listed anywhere. It didn't exist. That's when I started documenting everything. Photos, videos, voice memos. I even installed a new set of security cameras around the house and synced them to my cloud drive. And then I got to work. I canvassed the neighborhood, quietly, carefully. Turns out, I wasn't the only one who'd been targeted. The Mortons had their shutters forcibly replaced. Lyle Jenkins had been fined for having a non-regulation mailbox, even though it was the same model the HOA installed 10 years ago. One woman, Teresa, told me Vanessa had threatened to revoke her pool access because she refused to attend a meeting. This wasn't enforcement. It was punishment. I compiled a file the size of a small novel. Every bogus fine, every manipulated violation. Every time Vanessa had stepped on someone's property uninvited. But I needed more. That's when I learned about the compliance fund. It was buried in the HOA's financial records, which by law they had to make available to residents. After a poorly worded email request that Vanessa ignored shocking, I filed an official complaint with the city's housing department. Within 48 hours, I had the documents. The fund was supposed to be for community maintenance, sidewalk repairs, playground upkeep, the usual stuff. But Vanessa had been funneling money into it from fines she issued, and then hiring her cousin's company Langford Residential Services to perform compliance corrections, including painting my roof. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was ready. I printed everything, organized it into folders, and sent it off to the city inspector's office, the police, and most importantly, every single resident in the neighborhood. Then I waited. It didn't take long. The next HOA meeting was standing room only. Vanessa tried to carry on like nothing was wrong, wearing her usual smug expression and sipping from her sparkly Madam President tumbler. But this time, the crowd wasn't on her side. "Is it true you used HOA funds to pay your cousin to paint someone's house?" asked Mr. Delgado, a quiet retiree who usually kept to himself. Vanessa blinked. I can assure you that all financial decisions were above board." I stood up and held up the folders. "That's a lie. Here's every check, invoice, and transaction. Your cousin got paid over $8,000 in the last 6 months, and half of it was for compliance repainting. I was one of the targets." She tried to laugh it off, but the room had already turned. The Mortons stood, then Lyle, then Teresa. "You painted my roof without permission," I said, loud and clear. "That's vandalism, and I've got the footage to prove it." Vanessa's face went pale. "I already gave everything to the police," I added. "And the inspector's office." That was the moment she realized she was in actual trouble, not just another angry homeowner she could steamroll with HOA jargon and fake rules. But it was too late. The cops showed up before the meeting ended. Vanessa Langford, queen of Hilldale Lakes HOA, was escorted out in cuffs. Charged with vandalism, trespassing, and misuse of community funds, I stood in the back of the room, folder still in hand. For the first time since I moved in, the neighborhood felt quiet, but I wasn't done yet. That green roof, it was coming off, and the HOA, it was about to get a full audit. The day after Vanessa's arrest, the neighborhood was buzzing like a kicked beehive. Lawn chairs popped up in driveways. Strangers waved at each other with that wide-eyed look that said, "Did that really just happen?" Everyone had a theory about how deep Vanessa's schemes went, and no one was shy about sharing it. For the first time since I moved in, people were talking to each other, not just nodding from behind hedges. I wasn't interested in gossip. I had a mess to clean up, literally and figuratively. First on the list was the damage assessment. I brought in a roofing contractor named Devin, a no-nonsense Gulf War vet with a clipboard and a perpetual squint. He climbed up the ladder, took one look at the green sludge covering my shingles, and let out a low, impressed whistle. "She used industrial exterior enamel," he said, tapping the surface with a knuckle. "This stuff's meant for metal siding, not asphalt shingles. You try to pressure wash this off, you'll tear up the roof. So, replacement, full tear off. Probably around 20 grand, maybe more." I didn't react. I already had a plan forming. While Devin worked up the quote, I drove down to the county courthouse. I'd already filed my initial police report, but now that the financial misuse had escalated enough for Vanessa to be hauled off in cuffs, it was time to take it up a notch. I met with a civil attorney named Georgia Delacourt, a sharp, fast-talking woman who didn't flinch when I laid out the file. "I've handled HOA abuse cases," Georgia said, flipping through the photos. "But this is special. She vandalized my home, weaponized fake policies, and funneled thousands into her cousin's business. You want monetary damages, or are you going for blood?" "Both." Georgia's eyes lit up. "We'll file a civil suit this week. You'll want to document the roof replacement costs, the contractor's report, everything. And if you're open to it, we can push for a temporary injunction to freeze the HOA's discretionary funds." Do it. That was just the beginning. Back in Hilldale Lakes, the HOA board was in chaos. Vanessa's sudden removal had left a power vacuum, and the remaining board members, most of whom had rubber stamped her nonsense without question, were scrambling. They tried to hold an emergency meeting, but nobody showed up except for a few of Vanessa's loyalists. The rest of the neighborhood had seen the light. Teresa, the woman who'd been threatened over pool access, knocked on my door that evening with a stack of documents and a determined look. "I used to be a paralegal," she said. "Vanessa pushed me out of the board 2 years ago. Said I was too detail-oriented. I've got the original charter, amendment history, vendor approvals, everything." I cleared a space on my dining table. You just became my new best friend. Over the next 3 hours, we cross-referenced the HOA's supposed rules with the actual bylaws filed with the city. What we uncovered made my stomach turn. Vanessa had rewritten entire sections of the architectural guidelines without member votes. She'd fabricated a compliance committee made up entirely of her family members, none of whom lived in the neighborhood. She'd also redirected annual maintenance funds meant for sidewalk repair and street lamp replacement into what she described as discretionary enforcement efforts. She used the HOA account like her own slush fund, Teresa said, laying out a spreadsheet. This column here, it's a pattern. Every time someone challenged her, suddenly their property got flagged for a code violation. And guess who always won the contract to fix it? I said. We didn't need to guess. I sent the latest findings to Georgia. She responded the next morning with a single sentence. We're amending the claim to include racketeering. At this point, news had reached the local city council. Apparently, I wasn't the first homeowner to blow the whistle on an out-of-control HOA, but this was the first time someone had caught an HOA president on camera committing a crime in broad daylight. A councilwoman named Marisol Vieger reached out and asked to meet. We sat on my porch, sipping coffee while she flipped through the photos of the paint job. This is the kind of thing that makes people distrust homeowners associations, she said. And then nobody wants to serve on the board except people like her. She intimidated everyone into silence. Well, you broke that silence. She paused. I'm going to request a full audit of Hilldale Lakes. And I'm introducing a motion to require third-party oversight for HOA elections and spending over a certain threshold. You think it'll pass after what happened here? I'd be shocked if it didn't. Meanwhile, Vanessa's court date had been set. The charges included misdemeanor vandalism, trespassing, and felony misuse of community funds. But the real kicker was the civil suit. Georgia wasn't pulling punches. She filed a motion to subpoena Langford Residential Services' financial records, and when the court approved, what we found made things explode. Her cousin's company was a front. There were no employees, no business licenses, no tax filings, just a PO box and a checking account that funneled everything straight into Vanessa's personal bank account. Georgia called me the second she confirmed it. We're upgrading the civil suit to include fraud and conspiracy, and the DA just opened a criminal investigation into financial misconduct. I didn't celebrate, not yet. Instead, I kept pushing. I organized a town hall at the community center, no HOA involvement, just homeowners. We filled the room. I brought copies of the real bylaws. Teresa spoke about her experience. Even Devin, the contractor, showed up to explain what had been done to my roof and why it was so egregious. I've been in construction over 20 years, he said. I've never seen a homeowner association do this kind of damage under the excuse of enforcement. This was malicious. When he finished, the room stayed quiet for a beat. Then someone called out, "Let's dissolve the HOA." That sparked a debate. Some were all for it. Others wanted to restructure it from the ground up. But one thing was clear, nobody wanted another Vanessa. We took a vote, unofficial, but symbolic. 87 homeowners signed a petition demanding a full re-election of the board and the appointment of a temporary oversight committee. I handed it to Councilwoman Vieger the next morning. I'll make sure the city recognizes this, she said. 2 days later, a judge froze the HOA's accounts pending the outcome of the civil case. Vanessa, now out on bond, tried to file a motion to regain her seat as HOA president. The judge denied it without hesitation. By the end of the month, my roof was replaced. Devin gave me a discount for dealing with that level of stupidity. Georgia filed a motion for Vanessa to reimburse the full cost as part of the damages. The judge granted it. In the weeks that followed, a quiet but steady transformation began in Hilldale Lakes. Neighbors who had never spoken before were organizing cleanup days. Someone started a community garden on the lot Vanessa once tried to convert into guest parking. A few residents with accounting backgrounds volunteered to serve on the new oversight committee, and me. I joined the interim board. Not because I wanted the job, but because when you see how bad things can get, you don't let that door swing open again. Vanessa's trial for the criminal charges was set for early spring. The evidence was overwhelming. Between the bank records, the forged documents, and the surveillance footage, the prosecutor wasn't worried. Georgia leaned back in her chair during our last meeting and said she thought she was untouchable because no one ever pushed back. Not anymore, I said, and that was the truth. Hilldale Lakes had changed, and so had I. The first week of January, a certified envelope landed in my mailbox, no return address, just a legal firm's seal embossed in gold. Inside was a subpoena for a deposition. Vanessa was being formally charged with felony embezzlement and wire fraud. The state had picked up the case after uncovering that she'd forged HOA voting records to authorize budget increases, then rerouted tens of thousands into her own accounts under fake vendor aliases. I walked into Georgia Delacourt's office the next day with the envelope still sealed. She slid it open with a letter opener shaped like a hawk's talon and skimmed the contents. "They're moving fast," she said, flipping through the scheduling order. "She's going to try to stall, but the state's got her forking her own signatures on disbursement approvals. Her defense team's only hope is a procedural error. Can they pull that off? Not unless they convince a judge that forged votes and ghost contracts somehow fall under administrative discretion, which would be a first for the books." The legal gears were turning, but something else had begun to take shape in the neighborhood itself. After the petition forced the board to vacate their seats, the city appointed an interim monitor to oversee a fresh election. Her name was Keisha Darnell, a former housing regulator with the kind of deadpan delivery that warned you not to test her patience unless you were ready to lose a limb. She held the first town forum in the elementary school gymnasium, where paper signs labeled Candidate Introduction Night hung crookedly on the walls. Fluorescent lights buzzed above, as folding chairs scraped across the floor. I took a seat next to Teresa, who was now co-chair of the audit committee. Keisha stood at the front, clipboard in one hand, mic in the other. She didn't smile. "This meeting is for candidate disclosures only, no slogans, no promises you can't legally enforce. And if anyone mentions neighborhood aesthetic harmony one more time, I'm cutting their mic." A few chuckles rolled through the crowd. We were finally done pretending these meetings were polite affairs. The candidates were mostly new faces. A second-grade teacher who lived near the cul-de-sac. A UPS driver with 3 kids. One woman, Nora Bell, owned a landscaping company and wanted to redirect funds to maintain the greenbelts, which had been neglected while Vanessa was busy repainting people's homes against their will. When it was my turn, I stood behind the mic and glanced around at the faces watching me. A few nodded. One man crossed his arms and tilted his head like he was waiting for a punchline. "I'm not running to micromanage anyone's lawn," I began. "I'm running because no one should ever have to fight their own neighborhood just to keep their home safe." Keisha tapped her pen twice. "Time's up." I stepped down. The election happened 3 days later, monitored by city clerks with sealed ballot boxes. For the first time in years, people actually cared enough to vote. When the results were posted, I had won a seat. So had Teresa and Nora the landscaper. Vanessa's former allies, those who hadn't already resigned in shame, didn't even make it past the first round. We had barely begun reviewing the internal files when Nora uncovered something that knocked the wind out of the room. She called me at 9 in the evening, her voice tight. "There's a set of payments listed under Security Compliance Services, $5,000 each, monthly. But there's no vendor listed." I pulled up the spreadsheet copy she emailed me and scrolled through the entries. The payments started exactly 18 months ago and continued without interruption. No contracts, no tax documentation. "You think she was paying someone under the table?" I asked. "I think she was paying someone to stalk residents." The next morning, I went to City Hall and requested footage from the traffic cams near our neighborhood entrance. It took some wrangling, but after explaining I was now part of the interim board and presenting the audit request, they agreed to pull records from the months in question. That's when I saw it. A late model white van making regular appearances at odd hours, always parked near homes that had recently been fined or cited, sometimes for hours at a time. The license plate, came back to a private investigation firm registered 2 counties over. And guess whose name was listed as the primary account holder? Langford Residential Services. This wasn't just about money anymore. Vanessa had been surveilling homeowners who challenged her authority. One of the names from the PI's client list was Lyle Jenkins, the same man whose mailbox had been flagged for non-regulation dimensions. Another was a couple who'd spoken up about missing budget reports last spring. I handed the files over to Georgia. She took one look and gave a low whistle. She hired a PI to monitor residents without their consent. That's a privacy violation. Depending on how it was used, this could enter criminal territory harassment, stalking, even abuse of power under state housing statutes. The prosecutor agreed. They added a new charge, unlawful surveillance. Word spread fast. Lyle called me the next morning. I thought I was losing my mind, he said. I kept seeing that van parked near my house, but every time I looked out, it was gone. I thought maybe it was a utility truck. You weren't imagining it. Teresa sent out a community bulletin that afternoon, laying out the discoveries in clear, unemotional language. No drama, just facts. The surveillance, the fake vendors, the ghost ballots, the neighborhood didn't erupt. It exhaled. The next HOA meeting, now chaired by Keisha until the newly elected board was trained, was held in the high school auditorium. Over 100 residents showed up. Not to scream, to listen, to learn, to make sure it never happened again. We're implementing a new transparency policy, Teresa said from the stage. Every expenditure over $1,000 will require triple sign-off and be posted publicly within 72 hours. Vendor contracts will be verified through the state's licensing board, Nora added. No more cousins with paintbrushes posing as professionals. Then Keisha stepped up. Vanessa Langford's criminal trial begins next month, but the cultural trial, that's already been decided. You've seen what happens when power is unchecked. You're living in the aftermath. Don't forget how it started with silence. No one clapped, but heads nodded, dozens of them. Meanwhile, Vanessa's legal team tried one last trick, a plea deal. She'd take a reduced sentence and pay partial restitution if the state dropped the wire fraud and surveillance charges. The DA rejected it. Georgia called me the day before the trial. She's going to fight it, but the evidence is airtight. The surveillance alone is enough to bury her. Add in the forged ballots, the vendor kickbacks, and the property damage. She's looking at real time. I didn't attend the trial. I didn't need to. The courtroom was packed, reporters standing shoulder to shoulder outside. She was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to 6 years in prison, with an additional 5 years probation and a court-ordered repayment plan. The restitution fund was distributed to homeowners who had been directly affected, those whose properties were altered, who were fined illegally, surveilled, or had to pay out of pocket to reverse unauthorized changes. I received a check for just under $22,000. More than what I'd spent on the roof. I signed it over to the neighborhood's new community improvement fund. 6 months later, Hilldale Lakes looked different. Not in the manicured, color-coded kind of way that Vanessa had obsessed over, but in a real way. People waved again. Kids rode bikes down the sidewalks. The community garden bloomed with tomatoes, squash, and sunflowers taller than most of the homeowners. And the roof, it was now a deep slate gray, the kind of neutral that wouldn't offend a soul. But I left one shingle painted green dead center facing the street. A reminder, not of the time someone tried to control the neighborhood through fear and deception, but of what happens when people stop being afraid to push back. The day the restitution checks were distributed, a quiet sense of finality settled across Hilldale Lakes. No balloons, no speeches, just plain envelopes, hand-delivered by a city clerk with a clipboard and a tired smile. I didn't throw mine in the shredder, but I didn't cash it either. It sat on my kitchen counter for 2 weeks, unopened, like some kind of relic from a war we'd barely survived. I thought that was the end of it. Then I got a call from Officer Delaney, the same officer who'd responded on the day Vanessa climbed onto my roof with that bucket of horror green paint. His voice was stiffer than I remembered. "Everett, you might want to come down to the station. We've uncovered something bigger." I didn't ask questions. I just grabbed my keys. The police station was quieter than usual, but Delaney led me straight to a back room where a woman I didn't recognize waited. She had a leather folder open on the table and a badge clipped to her blazer. "Everett Brandt," she said, standing to shake my hand. "I'm Special Agent Carly Reese, Department of Housing and Urban Integrity." I didn't know that was a real thing. Most people don't. Until someone like Vanessa Langford shows up on our radar. Delaney gave a grim nod and closed the door behind me. Agent Reese opened the folder. Inside were pages of scanned emails, wire transfers, and photos I hadn't seen before. One showed Vanessa standing beside a man wearing a company polo with the words Langford Solutions printed above the pocket. Another showed a bank statement with transfers flagged in red. "This goes beyond your roof," Reese said, flipping to the next page. Vanessa wasn't just embezzling from your HOA, she was replicating the scam across 3 other communities. I leaned forward, trying to process it. She set up fake management companies, filed false vendor reports, and used HOA funds to purchase properties under shell LLCs. Then she appointed herself or a family member as HOA president, pushed through rule changes, and billed the communities for compliance services. She was running a full operation, I said. She built a real estate funnel. Used HOA funds to buy distressed properties, flipped them using community labor under the guise of neighborhood improvement, and pocketed the profits. How long has this been going on? Almost 6 years. We only caught on because of the footage you submitted. It matched a pattern we'd seen but couldn't prove, until now. I sat back, stunned. Her trial may need to be expanded. If the state attorney general agrees, it'll become a federal investigation. The fraud charges will multiply. So what happens to the other neighborhoods? Some of them are already organizing petitions to freeze their HOAs. Others are filing civil suits, but you're ground zero. I didn't know whether to feel vindicated or sick. "Why tell me all this?" "Because you kicked the first domino, and we need your testimony in the formal deposition." I nodded. "You'll get it." That night, I walked the neighborhood for the first time in weeks. The air was cold and still. The Christmas lights had long since come down, and lawns were dotted with early spring prep bags of mulch, garden gloves on porch railings, seedlings waiting in trays. I stopped at Nora Bell's house. She was kneeling by her mulch bed, brushing soil away from the base of a rose bush. "You hear about the new charges?" I asked, keeping my voice low. She didn't look up. "Yeah, Teresa told me. It's worse than we thought." "Much worse." She finally stood, wiping her hands on her jeans. "You think she'll do real time? Federal wire fraud, money laundering. She'll be lucky to see daylight before her 60th birthday." Nora shook her head. "She decorated the community center last year like she was Martha Stewart. Never thought she'd end up in the same kind of trouble." "She's not Martha. She's Bernie in a sundress." That got a dry laugh. The next week, I gave my full deposition. Agent Reese walked me through every document, every photo, every email. My testimony, combined with the surveillance footage and the financial records, gave the federal case the final push it needed. The state attorney general announced the official investigation into Langford Enterprises and its affiliates. Vanessa Langford, already out on bond for the previous charges, was arrested again, this time by federal marshals. They seized her assets, froze her accounts, and launched a criminal audit of every HOA she'd ever been involved in. But the real twist came during the asset search. One of Vanessa's shell companies had purchased a foreclosed home in Hilldale Lakes 6 months earlier. It had gone unnoticed because she'd filed the deed under an LLC named HLC Preservation Trust. But when the marshals searched the property, they found a hidden storage unit in the garage. Inside were boxes of HOA records, some dating back nearly a decade. Handwritten notes, altered ballots, old checks, and even audio recordings of board meetings where she coached members on how to push through illegal votes without triggering city review. It was a gold mine of evidence. The federal task force called it the most detailed internal cache they'd ever found in a housing fraud case. Among the items was a USB drive labeled contingency file. On it, a spreadsheet mapping out future neighborhoods Vanessa planned to infiltrate. She'd planned to scale the operation nationally, That was the final nail. The judge denied bail. Vanessa was formally indicted on 16 federal charges, including conspiracy to commit fraud, mail fraud, wire fraud, obstruction of justice, and operating a criminal enterprise under the guise of public governance. The trial lasted 5 weeks. I took the stand on the third day. So did Teresa. So did Lyle. So did a woman from a neighboring county who'd lost her home after Vanessa's HOA fined her into bankruptcy over excessive lawn shade. The jury was unanimous, guilty, on every count. She was sentenced to 21 years in federal prison, with no possibility of parole for the first 12. Her properties were seized, her accounts liquidated, and her name permanently struck from all civic and housing registries. Hilldale Lakes received a formal apology from the city for its lack of oversight, and a new municipal policy was enacted. All HOAs within city limits would now be subject to annual third-party financial audits, paid for by a pooled municipal fund. No more unchecked power. No more fake amendments. No more Vanessa. The new board, now fully elected by the residents and guided by a rotating accountability committee, voted to redirect a portion of the recovered funds to create a neighborhood legal aid program. Not just for Hilldale Lakes, for any community nearby dealing with abusive HOAs. They named it the Brandt Initiative. I didn't ask for that. I didn't want my name on anything, but the vote passed without me. At the ribbon-cutting ceremony, I stood in the back. Teresa gave a short speech. Nora handed out small potted plant succulents, low maintenance and hard to kill. Just like us, she said with a wink. Someone asked me if I was going to stay on the board. I told them no. I'd done what I came to do. Spring arrived without fanfare. The shingle I'd left green on my roof had faded to a dull olive, but I hadn't painted over it. I liked it that way, a reminder. Not of the chaos, not of the manipulation, not even of the legal battles, but of what one documented truth and a little courage could do to topple a lie built over years. Vanessa painted my roof bright green, but I painted the final stroke.